All right. I want to start by applauding you guys for your assignments. I'm not keeping records, so I don't know. Maybe some of you maybe didn't do it, but a lot of you did it. So I'm really grateful for that, and I really enjoyed it. But based off your assignment, I want to just do kind of a quick review about the terminology, because if one or two have the problem, then it's your fault. But if 10 of you have the problem, it's my fault. So, and about 10 of you had the same thing. So clearly I did not communicate that well. I apologize. So we're going to see if we can sort that out. So the word pericope is a literary unit with a single thought. Okay. So, and it just doesn't have to be the Bible. It's any piece of literature. Pericope is a literature technical word, not a theological word. So a pericope is a literary unit with a single thought that has a main point. So remember, the word pericope in Greek means to cut out. So you're cutting out the passage and you're handing the people the passage that you cut out of the Bible for them to listen to. Now, your passage, of course, is your pericope. So you can use the word passage. I'll use the word passage too. But I want you to think of it in terms of pericopes, because your passage may be more than one pericope, right? So if a pericope is a single unit with a single thought, you might preach from a passage that has more than one pericope. For example, Luke chapter 15. That might be your passage that you're preaching. That's the passage. But it's made up of three pericopes. The parable of the lost coin, parable of the lost sheep, parable of the lost son. Okay? So because those are three independent literary units with a single thought, you have three pericopes in a single passage. Make sense? So a pericope is a natural way to see a set of verses that present a main idea. So you start with this idea when you select a passage to preach. Start with a pericope. Find the passage that you want to preach and what is its natural unit. What's the natural literary unit that carries a single idea, or maybe not a single idea, but at least a main thought or a main idea. Now, this is not an exact science. The narratives are pretty easy to do because you have kind of a discernible ending, beginning and ending to a story. But the letters of Paul or Peter can be a real challenge. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's difficult. So you have to look at grammar clues or literary clues to pick up what the pericope is. Okay, so pericope, passage, and main point comes from the passage or the pericope that you're choosing to preach. All right, does anybody have any questions about that? Does that clear it out? I tried to make those notes on your submissions. I tried to do that. So if you have a question, let me know and I'll try to sort that out. Okay, good. So tonight we're going to look at the actual assembly, the actual preparation of a sermon. And there are two kinds of approaches, okay? You can preach from a manuscript, or you can preach from an outline. Now, I value the second one. If you want to preach from an outline, a lot of people do that. That's a wonderful way to do it. But even if you choose to preach a sermon with an outline, I suggest that you produce a manuscript first and then take the outline to the pulpit, okay? And I'm going to give you 9 reasons why. And so we are going to do I can already tell you now, your assignment in 2 weeks is you're turning in a manuscript. So you might as well just prepare yourselves. But I'm going to give you 9 reasons, and I'm hoping these 9 reasons will be instructive for you, and not just edifying to convince you to do it. But you have to do it because in 2 weeks you're going to do it. All right. So here's the 9 reasons. Number 1, when you write a manuscript, it gives you a chance to edit. Now, I'm going to give you a timeline that I use. This does not come from John the Baptist. This is just my thing. Ideally, I like to have my general outline of my sermon done a week ahead of the preaching. Okay, and we're going to look at what an outline looks like in just a moment. So that means that Friday or Saturday, a week before the Sunday I preach, the weekend before the Sunday I preach, I know my main point, and I know my approach to how I'm going to preach. Okay, so I like to have that done a week ahead of time. Then I use the week to fill out my outline with the content that becomes the preaching manuscript. So 7, 8, 9 days ahead, I've chosen my pericope or chosen my passage. I've found the main point, and I have outlined what I want to say about that main point, and I put it on a piece of paper, and that's going to be the structure I use all week long, and I'm going to fill in that structure all week long with manuscript. Now, editing is so important, and here are some examples of what you should edit from your manuscript. For example, guys, you have to choose your battles about the issues that a passage introduces. Some of the passages you guys picked are rich, man, rich. And you can't do all of that in a 25 to 35-minute sermon. You just can't unpack every theological idea, every theological word you just can't go through everything when you preach. So you're going to have to pick your battles about which theological idea, which main point you're going to preach. But you're going to be tempted to unpack everything for your people. You need to fight that temptation. Furthermore, there are some issues that are not agreed upon in the theological world. And I say this because unless you have to bring your congregation into those theological discussions, I wouldn't do it. It's okay to acknowledge that there is some disagreement about some passages that you preach. So I would just say, look, this is the position I'm taking, and we can discuss why I chose this particular position at another time, maybe a discipleship meeting, maybe a blog, whatever. For newbies, for you guys that have not preached a lot, I would stay away from passages that have significant textual or interpretive troubles, okay? For example, if you're a new preacher, don't preach the last chapter of Mark, okay? There are 3 endings on the end of Mark, and you do not want to spend your precious 25 to 35 minutes explaining the theological implications of the 3 endings of Mark, okay? Or women shall be, what is this? 1 Timothy, women shall be saved through childbirth. Wonderful passage, powerful, has a lot of meaning in our church. But if you're a newbie, you need to stay away from that passage because the amount of work it takes to unpack that theologically is just so rigorous. And so I would edit to avoid chasing after theological topics. Stay on point. You don't have to solve every theological issue that you encounter in a 25 to 30-minute period. So make sure that you're crafting your sermon to reflect the main point of the passage, which leads to number 2. Now, guys, this might be the most precious thing I tell you about preaching preparation, but you're going to be a bit surprised. Number 2 is you need to have a manuscript so you can say it out loud, so you can preach it out loud to yourself. I am a huge believer in hearing yourself say the words. I cannot tell you how many times I have listened to something that I have written, and as the words are coming out of my mouth, I am saying in my brain, I have no idea what you're saying. That doesn't make any sense to me. Now, it made sense to me when I was putting on the computer, but it didn't make sense when the words flew out of my mouth. And so I had to go back and make some edits. And when I say aloud, I don't mean in your head. I mean literally go to a quiet place and listen to yourself say the words. I would also practice involving your hands, your use of inflection, your pauses, your facial expressions as you read over your manuscript. Look, guys, you want to be able to bring energy into the text, okay? You want to bring energy into the text. Now, I wouldn't write things like, okay, smile here and lift your right hand here. That's too mechanical. This is not a healthy approach. But you need to get a feel for how you want your body to be included in the preaching moment so you can engage your audience. Now, it's a little strange, and you don't want to do it where the neighbors can see you outside because they will think you have gone mad. So pick a quiet place, pick a secluded place, and practice your script out loud. Here's the thing. I think preaching that is boring may be a sin. It may be a sin. I don't know if it's a sin toward damnation, but it might be. So preaching that is boring is a sin, and energy covers a multitude of sin in preaching. So bring some energy. So in respect to my timeline, here's what I do. I start on the weekend before, I get my outline together, and then during the week, I'm filling in the outline with manuscript, with text. I'm writing it out. And then by Saturday, Friday or Saturday, I should be finished with the manuscript. For me, that's 5 pages, a single space. I should be finished with the manuscript. And that gives me Friday and Saturday to say it out loud. And I may say that script, that manuscript 6, 7, 8 times before Sunday. I'm just going over it and over it again, listening to myself, which brings me to the third point. Write like you talk. You need to craft your words in a way that makes it sound natural and engaging to your audience. So ask yourself this question. When you're saying it out loud and you're listening, ask yourself, can I say this better? Is there a word that captures my ideas better? And that means you need to know your audience. Now, Brother Adam is in the United States, so I'm guessing that you guys are pretty kind of a monolithic, maybe all the same kind of education, and you're probably not an international community. But in Zach's church and in my church, we are an international church, and that means that we have to watch our English. We have to be careful of the way we say things. So using slang, using illustrations that are tied to your culture, that is not helpful. And you will lose a part of your audience that if language is their second or third language, you will lose your audience if they are not clued in to the kind of English you're using. So slow down, speak clearly, and choose your words wisely. Well, how do you know that can happen? Well, you do that because you're practicing your manuscript ahead of time. And as you're listening, you're saying, you know what, maybe that's not the best word. Maybe that's not the best illustration. That doesn't sound right to me. And you'll just, the amount of editing you do when you hear yourself say your manuscript, it's astounding. Which leads me to number 4. Teaching from a manuscript allows you to manage your time well. Now, generally, if I want to preach a sermon, I told you I have 5 pages of single-spaced manuscript. That takes me 27 minutes. If I'm really, really faithful to the script, I can do it in 27 minutes. Now, I generally don't write out my illustrations. So if I know the story well, I don't write it out. If it's about me, if it's about a situation that I was in and I'm telling the story, then I just write illustration and I write the name of the illustration and then I just tell the story. I don't use the manuscript. But if I'm using an illustration from somewhere else, maybe it's a moment in history, or maybe I got it from the news or social media, then I tend to write those things out for the sake of accuracy. But remember, if I don't write it, if you're going to use an illustration that you know really well and you're not going to write it out, it still adds to your time, right? So you just have to be aware that if you're not adding those things into your manuscript, then you're adding to the time without regards to the size of your script. So just be aware of that. And this is why you should say it out loud, because you want to be able to look at your manuscript and say, I've done 5 pages and it took me this long. And if it takes you 47 minutes, then dude, you've got to edit. You've got too much there. And the only way to do that is to preach it out loud to yourself, which leads me to the next thing. Preach from a manuscript, but teach from an outline. Teaching is an environment where you have more flexibility to, expand on certain points. You have the freedom to chase down some certain ideas. So an outline really works well. And I also think this is where you can spend a little bit more time on application. All right, so having said that, I'm going to introduce to you, and I don't know if I can pull this off on a Zoom call like this, but we're going to try it. I want to speak about 2 contrasts in preaching and teaching, okay? And the contrasts are this. You ready? Biblical command versus biblical wisdom. Biblical command versus biblical wisdom. All right, so here's the biblical command for the day. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loves the church. Now, if I preach that passage, what is that? Ephesians 5:22, something, a 5 something. If I preach that command, the main point of that verse must be processed within the context of Paul's overall purpose in the letter of Ephesians and within the context of chapter 5, which, by the way, if you look at chapter 5, is full of commands. That's not the only command in there. And so it's going to take some skill to think about how this command, husbands, love your wives, fits in with the rest of the commands that are listed in Ephesians 5. And there are other considerations you must think about. For example, what role does Jesus as the groom and church as the bride play in the command for husbands to love their wives? Well, it's huge, right? Well, shake your head if you completely agree with me that the theology of God, Jesus loving his church, has a huge bearing on how you're going to preach husbands love your wives, right? We all agree with that, right? Well, that is no small task to talk about Jesus's love for his bride. So you have to ask yourself, how am I going to play into teaching or preaching this passage? So if you just select this as your sermon passage, if you just say, I'm going to preach, husbands, love your wives, Christ loved the church. You'll be tempted, and here's the problem. You guys will be tempted to make this a textual sermon, not an expository sermon. So here's what you'll do. I don't see myself. Am I on? Can you guys see me okay? Okay. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. Here's what a lot of pastors do. Not you guys. You guys, I read your sermon. You guys are so smart, so much smarter than the average preacher. Really, I'm not kidding you. So you're going to start out with husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And then you're going to take that passage and you're going to launch out into other places in the Bible, and you're going to give men 5 ways to be a better husband. 5 ways to love your wife. Now, here's the problem with that approach. That's not what that text says. Okay? Now, if you want to do that, that's fine, but you've moved. Here's my point. You've moved from biblical command, which Paul clearly gives, and you've shifted into biblical wisdom, because what you say after these 5 things are not going to come from that text. They're going to come from someplace else. And a lot of guys may even operate outside the biblical text, period. So I think it's better if you take this approach. I think it's better that 5 steps to be a better husband is really suited for a discipleship or teaching moment, not the preaching moment. This is not your, okay, don't answer, just pretend like you're in your heart you're answering me, because Zoom is tough to do this. What challenges stand in the way of husbands fulfilling Paul's command? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Okay, now I want you to think about it. What are things, when you have husbands out there, when they listen to this, what are the kinds of things that challenge them to obey this command? Well, I can give you some. We're a sexually confused culture, or at least my culture is. Germans probably have all that sorted, but my culture is sexually confused. So that's a challenge for them. Social media gives the wrong picture of what biblical manhood is. The government makes policies that sometimes works against families. A man's flesh works against him in fulfilling that command. Sometimes you have guys in your congregation that have had really, really bad dads or terrible role models for them, right? So they don't even know what that means. When you say, husbands, love your wives, Christ loves the church, you got guys out there that say, man, my dad was a rotten father. He was a rotten husband. He's a terrible. That's a challenge for those guys. So my point is, the preaching time heralds, it declares that Jesus has overcome those things. Rejoice, man, rejoice, because whatever challenges you have in the world that keeps you from loving Christ, loving your wife, Christ has overcome. He has overcome the world. Hallelujah, because you can trust in Jesus. Now, it's more than Jesus is a good model, although I think, he's a pretty good model. He's a good guy to pattern your life after. I mean, Paul, I think in chapter 5, verse 1 even says that. But it's more than just being like Jesus. It's more than saying, well, Jesus died on the cross, you have to do that too. Jesus is more than a model. He's also promised to be an empowerment. He's promised to transform you, to give you a new identity, even when they don't see it clearly in their own lives. So preaching strengthens their faith in Jesus, while teaching in discipleship, teach them how Christ works for them in their specific situation. So the Holy Spirit will quicken their hearts in the preaching service to look to Christ. And in the teaching and discipleship time, the Holy Spirit will quicken God's people to walk alongside of them as they apply their faith in real life. So husbands, Love your wives as Christ loved the church. I'm going to, in the preaching moment, I'm going to spend more time on the whys in the what. I'm going to spend more time on you're adopted, you're empowered by Christ. I'm going to drive them in that moment to trust in Jesus, who has made a promise to walk with them and work with them in their marriage. But then you say, after the service is over, you're going to need some mentoring. You're going to need some instruction. You're going to need some admonishment. And the Bible is full of wisdom in that matter. God has some wonderful laws that you can apply to help you understand how to walk in your marriage in a practical way. So with the gospel in mind, let's seek what God's wisdom is in your marriage. And I think this is why preaching and teaching discipleship ministry have to work together. They are not divorced. They are both sides of the same coin. And this is why you need wise elders who can discern between biblical wisdom and biblical law, because you will be so tempted to take too many things and make everything biblical command that's outside the textual boundaries. And I want you to fight that. Preach what's there. Preach the text. And if there's not enough to bring about in solid application for changing marriages, teach them that and discipleship. But don't use teaching time to launch out into biblical wisdom comments that may or may not even be helpful for the people that are in your congregation. Okay, so give me, some of you guys are looking like I've spoken too fast. Give me a little bit of reflection on how that feels, the difference between biblical command and biblical wisdom. Anybody just have a real quick comment or question?
Yeah, I understand the difference, but I wonder why is it so bad to bring in some instruction and mentoring into this?
It's not bad to bring in some instruction. It's not bad to point people into some application on that matter. I'm not suggesting that you avoid it completely or neglect it. What I am suggesting is if you make your sermon that, if you read that passage and then you launch into, I'm going to talk about a formula you can use to make your marriage better, that is not biblical preaching, because it's not preaching the truth of that text in Ephesians 5. So don't hear me say to avoid application, practical application. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is your job as a herald means that you're pointing to Christ first. There may be some application that you want to bring in, and there may be some biblical wisdom that's certainly appropriate, but it shouldn't be the sermon. And I cannot tell you how many times I have sat through 5 ways to make my life better. And that's not biblical preaching. I mean, it might be helpful, but it also leads to some terrible ideas about the Christian faith. One of the reasons this is a bad idea is because biblical wisdom doesn't always work, okay? Biblical wisdom doesn't always work. And so you can't give people 5-step formulas that if they apply to their lives and it doesn't work in 1 month or 3 months, that they think, well, there's something wrong. This Christianity thing doesn't happen. That's not the way the Christian faith works. We're not a self-help program, right? We're heralds. We're declaring who Christ is and what he's done for us and why our faith should be strong in him. So, Andreas, you make a great point. I am not suggesting we avoid application. I'm not suggesting we don't give people biblical wisdom, but I am saying that if that's your sermon, if your sermon is only to provide a formula for making people get better, then you're not being a herald. Are we good with that? Andreas, you good with that comment? All right, I'll continue. If we'll have some time afterwards. You guys want to pick my brain, you can. Number 6. There is a downside to manuscript preaching, and that it can have a negative effect on the impact of your presentation. If you become tied to your manuscript, and that does and can hinder the preaching event. Honestly, reading sounds less engaging than, talking. But I don't think that's something you can't overcome. That just means you'll have to practice being good at reading a manuscript, or become a really good with an outline. But there is some disadvantages to that. Number 7, preaching manuscripts allows you to manage distractions with a little bit more elegance. So, your microphone gives feedback, your oldest son is on the front row, acting up, a phone goes off, I don't know, a bug flies in your mouth, something like that, whatever. It allows you to press on because you can just see exactly where you are, and you can just press on with the sermon and not let that become too big of a distraction for you. Number 8, this is one of my favorite points, is manuscripts help make transitions from one point to another more smooth. Transitions are hard for me. If I'm not careful, I just kind of wander into the next point. There's not really a good flow, and I am in danger of that. So I have to work on making nice transitions to make that sermon a little tighter. And you do that much better when you're in a room with a computer thinking about it than you are behind a pulpit just kind of trying to figure it out on your own. And then number 9, another reason to keep manuscripts or to write them is to archive your sermons so you can use them in the future. Now, I don't mean just not just for future preaching. In our world, we call this brown and serves. You guys familiar with that? You take it out of the refrigerator and you put it in the oven, just brown it until it's nice, and you eat it again. What you do with leftovers. Well, you can do that with sermons. You can take an old sermon that you preached 3 years ago, and you can put it in the microwave or put it in your oven and cook it again, and it's got a nice little crusty top, and you can feed it to your congregation. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. But having manuscripts is more than just preaching. Again, it's also for teaching. You may cover these things that you're preaching. You may cover them in the future, or maybe you're writing a blog, or maybe you're preaching at another congregation and you think, I remember I've preached that before. And if you'll index your sermons well, it will really help you keep prepared in the future, particularly if you've done already a ton of work on, like if you're preaching to the gospel and you've done a ton of work already, go back and look at your notes, go back and look what you preached. And that really can save you time and allow you to dig deeper the next time that you pull out, the next time you're asked to present something. Okay, so the sermon script itself, we've talked about the manuscript, okay? So we're all going to agree that we're going to produce a manuscript. Now, the structure for the sermon really depends on your approach to the text. We've talked about topical preaching. We've talked about textual preaching. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the week-to-week expositional approach is far better for your people. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Expositional preaching. Remember, expositional preaching, you get your points from the text. That you build your sermon from the passages that you've read to your people. All right. So we're going to look at 2 structures for building a sermon. 2 structures. And structure number 1. Read the passage you are preaching. Now, I love how David Martin, when I first came to IBC Bond, David made us stand and read the entire chapter from which that passage came. I thought that was brilliant. And I think that's a great idea. So in the top of your sermon, you can say, we're going to read the entire passage. But I suggest that in your manuscript, you put your passage that you're preaching at the top. So like I go and I just literally take the passage that I'm preaching, Matthew 22, 1 through 18, and I take that and I put it in my manuscript and I put it in italics. I do that because as I'm preaching, there may be something as I'm going, I may think, I want to draw, that reminds me of something back in the text. And it keeps me from having to fumble around and finding it in my Bible or whatever. I personally like that. So I keep it at the top. If you like to preach from the scripture so that people can see it, you reading the Bible, that's wonderful too. But anyway, in my system, I put the passage that I'm reading and I cut it out and I put it at the top of the page and I italicize it. And that's the passage I'm preaching. All right. Second, after you put the passage up there, the second thing you're going to put is the introduction. Now, the introduction tells them what you're going to preach about. It's your one point. Now, there are endless ways to do this. You can use a memorable story. You can do something engaging. You can tell them something funny. You can use an outlandish example from history or from the news. Anything that you want to use to introduce your main point, use it. Illustrations are normally the most common, and I think the best ones come from your experience. So I was preaching on Matthew 22, 1 through 18. It's the story of the man that, it's the story of the king that invited everybody to come to the wedding party and they turned him down. Do you remember this? And so he sent his armies, he killed them all. And then he said, go into the highways and byways and invite everybody in. You know this parable, right? But there was that one guy, that one guy? He didn't want to do it the way he's supposed to, so he shows up in his own clothes. You remember this story? Yeah. So I tell a story about how when I was in high school, my two best friends in high school were models. They were clothing models and TV models. They were incredibly good looking. And on the day, the couple of weeks for our senior dance, they modeled tuxedos. Okay, so they show up in our high school tuxedos. Well, that day we had a job interview at a truck company to work for the truck company in the summertime to load trucks. So my friends, my two guys came they didn't have time to change. So we showed up on a truck dock. I'm in t-shirt and jeans and tennis shoes, and they are in tuxedos. Who do you think got the job? Me. They thought those guys were nuts. There was no way they was going to be hired because their clothes didn't fit the setting. Okay, well, the illustration, that brings me into the text because the centerpiece of that story is this guy showing up into the wedding without the right clothes on. So because that's the main point of the story, I introduced that idea by telling this kind of funny story about my best friends and their wrong clothes at showing up at a job interview at a truck stop or at a truck company. Okay, does that make sense? So your introduction needs to do something to engage them with your main point. Got it? Introduction is just in introducing what you're going to preach about. Here's the main point, and I'm going to introduce that main point. Number two, after you've done the introduction, is the body of the sermon. Now, the body is just the main point. You're preaching about the main point, but you're using evidence in the text to understand that main point. You're going to deconstruct the passage with 2 or 3 or 4 points in order to help them understand why you say that this is the main point of that text. The main point of the text is this, and I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to spend 20 minutes explaining that in the body of this sermon. So you introduce what you're saying, then you say it, you give evidence in the text why you think that's the main point, and then the conclusion. And the conclusion is simply recapping what you've told them and making sure that they understand why this is important for them. This is the what's so what part of the sermon. This is where you can spend a lot of your time applying. All right, so introduction. I'm going to tell you what the main point is. Body, here's the main point. Conclusion, here's what I preached about, and here's why this is important for you to know. That's it. That's a sermon structure. And that's a very general, easy, all right, I've got a note that says our webpage just got hacked. Is that ours?
It's ICF's in Frankfurt, in Oberursel. We've had trouble with hackers, so Carsten's just gone to try and fix the problem.
Okay, there you go. Sorry, I thought there was something about us that we were doing wrong. Okay, so structure 1, very simple, very clear. Structure 2 is likened to it. It's a little bit different, and it's the one I kind of use, so I thought I'd introduce this as well. Same thing, I put the text on the top. Next thing is an introduction, same as the same thing, main point, nothing different there. What I like to do is I like to read, sorry, no, that's right. So you put the text at the top, you put your introduction. What I like to do is then, after the introduction, read the text, okay? So I give them, I say, we're going to talk about this, and I tell them the main point. Then I read the text. As I'm reading the text, I like to provide a little bit of commentary, a little bit of explanation. This is where I'll talk about something that's cultural in that time, or something historical, or something important about a Greek word or a Hebrew idea, or some kind of thing that fills out the storyline. Personally, I like to do that with a narrative feel. I like to take just about any story, any passage of scripture, and make it feel a little bit like a narrative. Now, if you're teaching a narrative story, there are a lot of details that the gospel writers don't fill in that you can help, for the sake of imagination, you can fill in. You know, you can talk about a dusty road that they walked down on the road to Emmaus. You can talk about the coolness of the morning and the dew that would have set, and the way that would have made the disciples' feet wet and gross with dirt as they come into the Lord's Supper or into the upper room to eat the Passover meal with the Lord. I mean, there are details and fillers that you can use to engage your people in the story. I like that approach. I like to bring them in to the story more than just reading it and maybe stopping along the way. You're reading, you stop and say, you know, that's funny he should say that. That word that he's using is so interesting here. It's used in another place. It's an interesting word. I just want to point that out. And so you read the story with a commentary or narrative feel. I thought Alistair Begg did this very well in his story that I assigned you. You know, he tells you the story, but he tells it to you with such a winsome manner. You know, there's just a feel that you can be there with him listening to that activity take place. So you can bring a little imagination, a little narrative to your story. Peter, somebody in our group's doing the confrontation between Peter and Paul. Who is that? I don't remember who it is. Anyway, it's somebody.
Pablo.
It's Pablo.
Pablo, there you go. Pablo, that passage, man, that would be such a good way. This is a great method for this, as you introduce conflict over theology, you know, this kind of conflict over the law versus grace. And you're going to tell that confrontation, and you can talk about how, you know, at first Peter and Barnabas were pretty comfortable as people came in. You could see them moving into the corner of the room, and there started to be whispers rather than talking. And you could even tell by the clothes that the guys on the right were Gentiles and guys on the right Jews. There was such an uncomfortable, and Paul gets up and he begins to hammer on the table. I mean, you can use those kind of imaginative effects that bring your audience into the story that I think brings energy and helps you not commit that sin of boringness, remember, which is a damnable sin. Okay, so then the third step for me is after I've read the text, so I put the introduction and then I read the text with commentary or imagination. Then I say these words. All right, we've looked at the text. Now I want to take this time to make 3 observations about this text and how this applies to you today, or something like that. I just want to make 3 observations. I want you to know 3 things about this passage, and then I try to do that with an eye towards Christ. All right, so making sure they understand how this message impacts them. Maybe, some people think this, but really the Bible says this, some kind of contrast, comparison. I try to do something, but I try to say, here are 2 or 3 or 4 points, 3 or 4 observations about this passage, and that becomes my application. And then my conclusion is the final moment that I try to make the gospel clear. So I say something like this. Man, we're so glad you're here. If you're a believer, I know a lot of this stuff makes sense to you, but if you're not a Christian, if you don't really understand what we do as Christians, can I explain something to you about this passage? Christians believe this, or Christians have this idea. And I use that to like I'm pulling them off to the side, and I'm just giving them a little coaching about this sermon. And I want to make sure that they understand who Jesus is and why we think about these things. And so that's a nice way to kind of conclude your time. Okay, so 2 preaching structures. Read the passage, introduce what your main point is, deconstruct the passage to point to the main point, tell them what you preached, tell them the what's up, what it matters to them, and that's structure number 1. Structure number 2, introduction, read the passage with commentary, give 3 points of observation and application, and then a conclusion, thought that contrasts Christian faith against those who may not be Christian in the room. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to take a little bit of questions because I may have gone too fast. Does anybody have any questions about the suggested structure? You need to get this right because this is your assignment for the next 2 weeks.
David, could you run through quickly again just those, particularly the first one? You had to read the passage, you had an introduction, the 1 point, and then you had the body. Yeah. Then in your sum up, you added a few other points. What?
So the conclusion is where I draw application. So I've made my 3 points, and now I'm kind of saying, okay, here's why this matters for you. Here's the so what portion of the sermon. Now, Jonathan, there's no reason that you can't do that in the body of your text. You could make a point in the text and say, this is really an important application for us. That's great. And if you choose to do that, then you just, in your conclusion, just make sure that you note, this is what I told you. So, but in terms of structure, you remember, guys, I give you the four points of biblical interpretation. You start with what the author says, then you go to who the author writes to, and then you go filtering it through the cross, and then down to application for us. You remember that? So those 2 points, the first 2 points, need to be evident in the body of your text. You're going to give the people some general understanding of what the text says. You're going to give the people a general understanding of what the author what it means to the recipients of that time. Then you're going to talk about Then you're going to talk about what that means as believers, why that's important as believers. And then in the conclusion, you can talk about application. Why is this important to you? It's really hard to give you a complete structure because some passages of scripture lean towards structures differently than others, right? So narratives have a different kind of feel than, say, Paul's letters or the Proverbs. So sometimes the passage itself in the literary style may lend itself to one form of structure or another. But my opinion is that first structure, introduction, body, and conclusion, you can do that with just about any pericope, any passage of scripture. You can do that. That's kind of writing 101, right? I mean, we've probably all grown up with those three things: introduction, body, conclusion is kind of a standard way of talking anyway. And I think you can easily apply that to the passage. Did that help, Jonathan? Okay, somebody else?
Can you repeat point 6, please? It was a bit too quick for me to write down.
Yeah. There is a downside to preaching with a manuscript, and that's that it makes it, it ties you to the script. So if you choose to manuscript preach, that's great, but you're going to have to be good at it. You need to learn how to be a good preacher. We're going to talk more in the last session that we spend together in 2 weeks. We're going to talk more about the preaching event, and I'll include how to be a good manuscript preacher. And I think some of those tips will be helpful for you.
Thanks.
Sure. Anybody else have a question about the structure?
I have a question. Can we start with an outline and then do the manuscript? Because sometimes just writing the manuscript is just too much text. So is it good to just start with the outline and then like fill in the blanks below each bullet with the paragraphs?
Absolutely. That's what I do. On Friday or Saturday before the next weekend, I have my text on my computer at the top of the page. I have my text, I have the main point, and then I have my outline. So I'll say, point, the main point, and then introduction, and then point 1, 2, 3, conclusion. So then your 1, 2, 3 is just your outline of how you're unpacking that main point from the text. What evidence from that text leads you to say that that's your main point? Why, Pablo, do you say that your main point is this? What is it? How do you get to that? Well, let me tell you, my friend, I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes telling you why I'm getting to that point and why it's important to you. So yeah, get that outline written. And then during the week, I like to fill up that outline with text. All right, here's a one from, we have people writing in. This is very exciting. Biblical command versus biblical was number 5. What was number 4? All right, let's see here. Number 4. Preaching or writing a manuscript allows you to manage your time well. That's number 4. Writing a manuscript allows you to manage your time well.
I think Jens has his hand up.
Yes, go for it.
I was thinking, how would we build the body of the sermon? And as I read through my passage, I was thinking of you could do it verse by verse, so you kind of take the structure from the text.
Yes.
But I'm also thinking sometimes it might also be that there are some content points which kind of appear in all the verses, and then you could also structure it that way, that you say, well, what does the text say about God? And then you have the different points.
Yeah.
Then you say, and how does that apply to the people in that situation? And then you give some subpoints. So the structure is not anymore the text, but it's more the content.
Yeah.
Advice on that?
Yeah. And I mean, this is an hour call. I wish we could, it would take another couple hours to really develop how do you do the points. Here's what I would tell you. Every text in every genre of literature kind of has its own demands on what you're going to bring out from that text. So for me, I would just let the text. We say in American football or baseball, let the game come to you. Let the text come to you and tell you this is what needs to be said, or here's the process that we need to use from the text to help us communicate to our people. So I want you to be driven by how the writer gives you that main point, and then use that text as the structure. I would not impose upon the text a structure that comes from the outside.
Yeah. Another question. What do you think on visual ads? Like, if your body has 4 main points,
Right.
would you give them to the audience, or would it be like, well, they better find them out by listening to you?
I like to tell them. I say right up front, I want to tell you 4 things about this passage I think are important for you to know. Number 1, Jesus loves you. And I want you to see in this text why I believe Jesus loves you. And look what Paul says. He says this right here. He says Jesus loves you. And I want you to know why that's important for you to understand in this context. Who's he talking to? I would tell them, make it easy for your audience. Now, there are preaching styles that are inductive, that can be very effective, but I'm talking about week in, week out, meat and potatoes, living in Germany, preaching. You need to serve it up for your people to understand clearly what your main point is. So tell them, I'm preaching about this. Here's the 4 points, and I preached about that, and make sure they leave with the main point.
So you would rather not write it on the wall, like with the presentation?
I mean, you can. I thought you meant, you mean like on a screen, right? On a computer screen in the back?
For instance, or a handout, or you can put it on YouVersion, or there are different ways.
Sure. Anything that'll help your people discern what you're saying is gold. You should do that. So absolutely. Sorry, I didn't understand the question well, but I do now. I'm just good looking, brother. I'm not really smart, but I am way good looking. All right, somebody else? I'm going to close with this. I'm not going to really take any comments on it. I'm just going to give it, this is writing material, so I might be able to add it to David Martin and let him send it to you. But I want to give you a 2-step category for sermon evaluation. And I want to give this to you now because we're going to evaluate you at some point, and I want you to know what the rules are before you start the game. So real quickly, and then this will be what we close with, and then we'll entertain questions as long as you like. We're going to evaluate your sermon based on 2 categories. The first is content, and we're going to ask 4 questions. Question number 1, does the sermon have a main point? Does the sermon have a main point? If yes, write down the main point. So you're listening to, I'm listening to Dean preach, and as he's preaching, I need to know, does his sermon have a main point? And if it does, I'm going to write it down. Number 2, was the sermon faithful to the text? In other words, did you get your points from the text that you said you're preaching from? If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, I'd like to figure out why that is. So you might write down, in what ways do you say it wasn't faithful to the text? Number 3, was the gospel discernible? Was the gospel discernible? If you build a sermon that just tells people what to do, you have not preached the gospel, you've preached law. And you're heralds of the gospel. So if that's your sermon, if your only sermon is to tell people where they failed and how they can do better in life, then you're not preaching the gospel message. The gospel message has to point to the sufficiency and work of Christ. Can I get an amen with a smile? All right, good. Number 4, was there a clear call to respond in some way? Is it clear? I've heard this message. Brother Faulkner gave this amazing message. Pontus was crying on the front row. It was amazing. The question is, when I asked Pontus, what are you going to do? He's got to be able to say, yeah, as a result of this message, this is how I'm going to respond. Okay, so that's the 4 questions for content. Here's also 4 questions for delivery. This is the second category, delivery. And you're going to use a 1 to 5 ranking system. 1 is the worst, 5 is elite level. All right. So here it is. And the four are eyes, lips, hands, and hips. Eyes, lips, hands, and hips. Eyes. What's the face like? What's the facial expression? What kind of energy are they communicating with their face? Lips. How's their speech pattern? Are they too fast? Are they too slow? Are they speaking loud? Are they speaking too soft? What about the cultural sensitivities and the words that they choose? Eyes and lips. Hands. Where are they? How much do you use them to communicate? What's their use of the microphone? And then hips. When I say hips, this is the overall movement and energy of the sermon. I want to know, did the preacher, did he believe what he preached and wanted you to believe it by the way he acted? Energy can make such a huge difference in how you hear a sermon. So those are the 4 things: eyes, lips, hands, and hips. The purpose is not to tear down, but to edify and encourage. So I recommend starting with an evaluation with something like this. Pastor Stephen, I really like what you said here. Pastor David, that was an excellent point you made. I like to start with things that I affirm. We are not movie critics here, guys. We are here to encourage and strengthen the body of Christ, and you are an important part of that process. So make sure that if you're going to point out things that are negative, make sure that you give plenty of things that are positive, so that you at least encourage and edify. And also, of the 2 between the content and delivery, which one do you think I think is most important? Number 1 or number 2? Content or delivery? Number 1 or number 2? You big fat liar. Good grief. Yeah, number 1. Number 1, it's always more important what you say than how you say it. But here, the bottom line, and I want you to feel this for me, I am less concerned about you being great. I am more concerned about you being solid. Okay? You can grow a church with solid preaching. So that's what we're shooting for here, guys. We're not shooting for Alistair Begg. We're not shooting for, whoever you think is a great pastor. We're shooting for solid here. We're shooting for something that feeds your people well and encourages them in their faith in Christ, that their faith in Christ is strengthened, and that that they're growing in their faith as a result of being there. Okay, now that's the finishing moment. So I will answer any questions you have about anything.
I have a question, and that's about the main point. So I think I heard quite a few times something about this, a 3-point sermon. Is that just because you teach us now the different style, or is that something? I mean, I don't really get everything what you said, because what I mean is we have like a preaching seminar here, and there are many ways to preach and whatever. And I heard many times about this 3-point sermon, and you're saying now 1-point sermon, which I think makes a lot of sense. But for other texts, it may just be difficult to have only one point. So how is that connected together?
Let me clear that for you. The preaching has to have a main point, has to have one, okay? But when you discuss that main point, you should have 2 or 3 or 4 points underneath. This is what they mean by 3-point sermon. It's the main point, but then the 3 points are strengthening the main point. You're making a declaration. Andreas, I forget what your passage was.
It was about the Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath.
Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. So you're picking the one about them picking the grain out of the field. Is that right? Or
yes.
Okay. All right. So Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Okay. That's your main point. But that story, that story of Jesus has other topics. There's information there that Matthew included in order to make that main point. Well, that's your job, is to help your people see Matthew included the story like this. He told you these things in order to support the idea that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. So your main points your 3 points strengthens the main point that you're making to your people.
To be very honest, this topic, for example, Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, it's such abstract. I want to say that I feel I don't want that if my audience is coming home and they are asked by their family what was their sermon about, I don't want that they say Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, because it's so abstract. I rather want them to say that they say it was about that. Then probably the other point.
Okay, Andreas, what do you want them to say? What do you want them to say?
I want them to say that that you have to, how to say, that you should not follow blind, that you should, I have basically 3 points. Yeah, also as I write it down. First, that Jesus basically decides how his laws are interpreted, and you should not overlay it by extra burdens by humans. And in order that you really understand what the hello.
Yeah. So that's a good main point, but you're going to have to shrink that down into something that works, that's manageable, and then discuss that and use the body of your text to build a case for what you just said. Look.
So are you saying I should change then my topic? My main point should in that case not be Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, and I should change it and make it another point, or what does that mean now?
I mean, I don't remember. I'd have to look at the text in with you to see it. But yeah, here's what you're struggling with is the what. So what? Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. So what? What does that mean for me? Who cares that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath?
Yes, exactly.
So Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath works as a main point, as long as you can unpack why that's a big deal.
Okay.
So I'm good with your main point, because that's the main point that comes from the passage. In fact, I think Jesus tells you that's the main point of the passage, because I think he said, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. So Jesus already told you the main point. That's fine. Now you just be able to support what that means and why that's important. And those are your points. Does that help?
Yes.
Hey guys, I am happy. No, the pericope is the text, not the point. The pericope is the actual text that has one single unit. Okay, so there's a difference between the point and the pericope. The pericope is the unit, the literary unit. The point is that idea that comes from the pericope. So I think CT asked that question. So Andreas, I can't do this for everybody. There's just so many of it.
Yeah, I understand.
But for some of you, you won't need that. If you'll send me questions on email, I'm happy to. Or who's your pastor? Andreas, who's your pastor?
Carsten.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, I've already told, and let me just remind the vocational pastors that your job with your non-vocational guys is to help them develop these things. So, and I'm happy to be a part of that process too, but I do not want to circumvent pastoral care and pastoral authority in your church. So, Andreas, I would work with your pastor and have him help you develop that point, because you may need some material to help you understand that better, maybe some commentary, you may need to work through that a little bit to get that body organized the way you want it to, right? So he can help you, and I'm happy to help you too. It may cost you, but are you in Frankfurt?
Yes.
Yeah, well, then if I come to Frankfurt, it may be a cup of coffee. That's usually what I charge David Martin, so we'll see. All right, somebody else have questions about CT? Did you understand the difference between pericope and main point?
Yeah, my comment was more about what he was saying about Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. That was what I'm thinking. What is the pericope instead of being the main point?
No. The pericope is the passage. Matthew, I don't know what the address is, but Matthew 12, 6 through 11, that's the pericope.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main point you draw from the pericope.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay. What I was thinking was that this text, Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, covers the text that he is actually talking about. So that would be the pericope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
As you evaluate the sermon, the first point was, does it has a main point? The second point was, is it faithful to the text? And then I got, was the gospel discernible?
Yes.
And that were the 4 points, but I only got 3.
Oh, I think does somebody else have that? Let's see.
Was there a clear call to respond?
Oh, right. Is there a clear call to respond? That's right.
Is there a clear what?
Call to respond.
Okay. Yeah.
This is the what, so what? Did they answer the question, so what? I preached. Now to the people, can the people say, okay, now that he said that, here's how I should respond to that message. Maybe I'm trying to change the way that people see Jesus. Maybe I'm trying to change an attitude towards something that passage is talking about. There's some kind of change I want them to have in their life. This is how I want them to respond. And there should be a way to see that. And it's generally in the application. All right, somebody else?
Yeah. Yes.
Bring it, man.
All right. So maybe could you give some general advice on when it comes to writing out, filling up those points?
Yeah.
in my brief experience, I usually spend about 3 days kind of banging my head off the wall and frustrating everyone, including my wife mostly, about how I cannot get this kind of down clearly in a way that it works to so many ideas. That discipline of maintaining one kind of focus through it, and what you said at the beginning, I think, was choosing your battles.
Yeah, choose your battle.
It's hard to do it when you're, at least for me, when I'm typing or writing or speaking, than where I would be in front of people delivering a monologue. You give some kind of advice maybe, or general insights or instruction as to how to not streamline the process, but maybe avoid the unnecessary kind of struggles?
Yeah, you might. What are you preaching on? What's your text?
The Ephesian elders, Acts 20, second half.
Oh my gosh. I think huge. That is so huge. There's so many ways to go through that.
Uh-huh.
I think, Jonathan, that's where starting with the main point really helps. Pick the one thing and build off of that and practice saying, ask yourself, okay, these other three things in the passage are really important too, but do they support my main point? Those things are cool, and that's really, I would love to be able to tell that to them, but does it really help me communicate this point, what I need them to see out of that passage? That passage, I remember the big thing is false teachers. False teachers are coming among you as like wolves, and they're wolves that are living in your congregation right now. You have wolves in your congregation right now. That's the main point. Man, I want to talk about what that looks like. Here's what it looked like in Paul's day. Here are the kind of things that Paul had. You know what? Those same kind of things are showing up in our congregation too. Let's talk about some of those things that Paul faced and how those things creep into our own church life. So there are a lot of other things in that passage. You mentioned, the importance of elders, the importance of being in local church. And those may strengthen a little bit of what you're saying, but that text is about false teaching and about pastors protecting their congregation from bad teaching. And I would just carve out anything that doesn't support that idea. And just start typing, man. You just start, just print, just whatever comes to your brain. If it doesn't make any sense, don't worry. Just get it on the page and then come back and rehearse it and look at it and let that process help you edit to a place that becomes tighter and more meaningful.
I have another question. Is the main point of the sermon, is that also the topic? So like if you want to have, for example, a PowerPoint presentation and you have one topic there, what would you put there? Would you put there the main point, and then under it you would have the passage? Probably, I guess, you would have the main point as your topic, and then maybe the passage underneath on the first cover slide, or is that not necessarily the case?
Oh, that's great. Here's the passage, here's the main point, and then the 3 points underneath, A, B, and C, and then conclusion. You can put that on the screen if that's helpful for you.
No, I just mean, like normally when I have a sermon, I want to have a topic of my sermon. I say, okay, this is my topic, and I probably have it as basically on the top slide before I basically start with the introduction or something. I have the top slide, and I want to give it a topic. Yeah, like a movie title or something. Yeah. So is that normally, I ask your opinion, is that normally the main point of the sermon that you would have as the topic of your sermon?
Yes, the main point. Now you can take titles and you can make them creative, fun, winsome. If you want to do something fun with the title, you can, or you can just take the main point of the sermon. I think Stephen Campbell, I think that's what he does. The main point of his sermon is the title of the text generally. Am I right, Stephen Campbell?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, so he does that. I think that's a great thing. And then the people have that in their mind. This is what he's going to preach about. This is the main point. And this is what I should be listening for and looking for out of that passage.
David McCauley has a hand raised.
I see that hand.
Yeah, the question is actually from me. It's Matthew here. It's actually about something you said a little bit earlier, which was about the kind of the importance of the link between the preaching and then the teaching within a mentoring relationship or something like that. How do you actually go about kind of trying to make that something that fits together? And how is a follow-up question would be, how is that different when you're the regular preacher and when you maybe just preach a one-off?
So we have a Pastor Stephen preaches a sermon on Sunday, and then on Thursday we have life groups. And normally in the life groups, I don't normally redo what he's taught. He's already taught the message. So I just try to do further application in deeper understanding of what he said. So Pastor Stephen said this, let's really talk about what that looks like in your daily life. Because Stephen doesn't have time to do 5 ways to make your life better by listening to the sermon. He's 25, 30, 35 minutes to preach. So I use that time or 40 or 45. I use that time in my life group to say, hey, here's some things that I think you need to be reminded of, and let's talk about how we can apply those in your daily life, why this is important to you. And sometimes, brother, forget who asked that question, David McCauley. That conversation happens with, like it did today, over a text, where somebody asked me questions and I was answering questions with my on my phone. So you're building the idea that, yes, what we heard from on Sunday was important and good, but let's carry this conversation on. Let's talk more about how this is applied, rather than just leaving it on the Sunday morning and not thinking about it again. So if you're discipling guys, if you've got a group of guys that you meet regularly or whatever, that's the time you say, you're sitting over coffee and you say, hey, Stephen talked about these things. Hey, what did you think about that? How did you respond when he said that thing? And let that be the impetus for digging deeper and creating application.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. I think that's quite challenging in a big church or a bigger church, let's say, because let's say I'm the preacher, I might not know all of the life group leaders. So how would you have any advice how to coordinate that in a good way? As in, would you share resources with them around application, or how would you do that? I
mean, you're talking about a structure. You're talking about
more of an organization kind of thing, yeah.
And I think that for a large church, it is a problem. You may have to think about a structure, but it's also a culture. It's just the culture of the church thinking about the passage. Now, I don't know in your church what you do. You may have other platforms for teaching. Maybe you load up a YouTube video of, hey, we preached about this. I want to do a 20-minute, 15-minute video on ways to apply this, or some kind of additional material. But at that point, it really needs to be more of a culture in your church that deals with it. Otherwise, if you devote preaching to now I'm talking about extremes, but if you just use your preaching time to talk about the hows and never about the whys and the whats, then church then becomes just another place to get better. And that's not heralding the good news of Christ. And so that's my big theological point that I'm trying to make to you guys is you can strike a balance between solid application without sacrificing Christ is our sufficiency. Christ is who we're putting our faith in. Let's strengthen our faith in Christ. There is a balance out there.
Great, thanks.
Good, man. Anybody else? We've got 6 minutes.
Can you talk about good news and bad news one more time?
Okay, so I don't remember who's preaching the passage on Jesus and the rich young ruler. Who is that? Anybody? Somebody in this call, or maybe they've left, somebody is preaching the rich young ruler. So the rich young ruler, is it law? Is Jesus teaching law, or is he teaching gospel? Man comes to Jesus and says, what must I do to get into heaven or into the kingdom? And Jesus says, well, do these 5 things from the law. And he says, yeah, dude, I've got that sorted. And Jesus says, okay, one thing you lack, go sell everything you have and come follow me. And the man goes away sad because he was rich. Is Jesus preaching law, or is he preaching gospel?
It had to be the gospel.
No, he's preaching law. He's telling you, this is what you have to do, right? In order to get into the kingdom, you have to do these things. That's the law. Do the law. In fact, he gives them, the law that he gives them is from the Decalogue, from the 10 Commandments. So he gives them these commandments and says, do them. And the guy says, dude, I can't do them. And Jesus says, yeah, that's right. You can't do them. The law doesn't give you life. It only brings you death, and it brings you frustration. So what do? Well, you turn to Christ. So Jesus, when you tell people to do in order to get God to do something for you, that's law. And you don't want to tell people, you don't want to make people bear the weight and the burden of being accepted before God. That's the last thing we want to teach them. So anytime you do that, you've taught them law. Now, as a believer, the law is very helpful. It tells me what brings pleasure to God. I don't lie, because God is pleased by that, right? But it doesn't tell me how to get into the kingdom, and it doesn't tell me how I gain acceptance or how I sustain acceptance. So, yes, I'm probably not going to answer your question very well, because in my opinion, it's one of the great distinctions that we're not very clear about in the evangelical world, is the distinction between law and gospel. And we've confused this two so long that people come to church hoping for good news, that Jesus will do this with them and for them, and instead we just give them more law and tell them to do more stuff. And that doesn't bring hope. That brings death if you're not a believer, and that brings discouragement if you are. So you're going to have to sort that out in your own mind. This is a long conversation where you're going to have to sort in your mind when you preach, what does my preaching look like? Is it law-based, or is it gospel-based, and what's the difference and why? And I probably just can't settle that in this 2 minutes we have left. That seems like a big thing. But I'm happy to have that conversation with you during the week if you want.
Just if I'm allowed to add just one thing. I think for me, first, I struggled with the good news, bad news, what Jan said. I think, could it be good to not say you have to these commands, but to remind that we are called to repent, like for an example. So just to give an idea that there is an action we have to do to come back to Jesus, to repent, to realize, to reflect, oh, I'm on the wrong way, and to give a call. And this could taste and smell like a command, but it's no, what is it about? What is it about? Repent. Let's get on the knees back again and accept this present of mercy.
I agree with you, brother. My question would be to you, where does that come from? Where does the desire, where is the power, where is the hope of repentance come from? Is it generated by me, or is it generated by Christ in me? Is it something that I do for Christ, or is it something that I plead with Christ to do in me? Is it a result of Christ, or is it something that I get Christ? What I'm trying to do is say, look, I agree with you. I don't want to ignore that part of it. But on the other hand, that's not something that we generate. That's something that we cry out for Jesus to come do with us and in us. It's not something that we kind of generate in order for God to kind of like us again. And so we got to get that. Does Jesus like us? Yes or no? We got to get that kind of sorted first, and then talk about our response to our acceptance before God. it's a tough topic, and it's tough to do this in a 45-second, 1-minute context. And so I'll work on doing a better job of kind of managing that for you guys. But you're right, brother. I'm not disputing that at all. That those things are true. It's just those things are true.
There's no good news without the bad news.
There's no good news without the bad news. Yeah.
And so there's actually hope in the bad news, in that sense that the reason we bring up hope is because it's not the end of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Our good news is Jesus. That's the good news.
Yeah, I think Alistair Begg, I think it's more gospel-centered than law-centered. I mean, Alistair Begg, when he preached, he said, these are the things that you should fulfill, but then he says that, but you haven't put me first and above your idols. So he's basically using the law as an illustration that we can't come to God or come into the kingdom without on our own power. So I think the law is great for us to say we can't do it on ourselves, or by ourselves, but if we come down on our knees to God, then we get into the kingdom. I think so. It's a mixture of the law proving that we can't do it on our own, and the gospel. This is the way that Christ enabled us to come to the Father.
Right, but for that guy, it was only bad news because he walked away. If he had come to Jesus and said, "Dude, I can't do these things; it's impossible," then Jesus could have given him the good news. Well, then follow me, dude, because I'll do that. I'll do that for you. I'm going to do that for you. Follow me. But the guy left, and it broke Jesus's heart because he left with bad news. That's all he had was the law. And the guy said, I can't keep the law. And so he walked away. So for that man in that story is bad news for that guy because he didn't do what you just said. If he had come to Jesus and cried out for mercy, like some of those other guys did in the story, Jesus would have showed him mercy and it would have been great news. But in that story, in that particular story, it's just bad news for that guy, sadly. And I'm only using this as an illustration that when you're in the pulpit, those are the kind of things you've got to think through. You've just got to go through the process of grace, law distinctions, wisdom, biblical commands. That's my point in bringing this up, not to solve it theologically for you guys, but only to put it on your radar that those things are important in the sermon content. And I stunk it up pretty good trying to explain that so quickly. And we have on a recording too that I stunk it up too. So that's that. Thank you guys for recording that. All right, let's pray together. We'll close our evening out and I'll see you in 2 weeks. And if you have questions, feel free to write me and I'll hopefully everybody that wrote me with your sermons, hopefully you heard back from me. I tried to respond to everybody, but if you didn't, just send it in again. I'll try to pick it up and do it. Let's see, Brother Zach, can you close us in a word of prayer, my friend?
Sure. Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for this rich evening of how to unpack and organize and form a sermon. Thank you for David, his teaching, Lord. So resourceful and valuable, Lord, that we may be able to use it as we prepare our sermons, our main points, and that we are able to handle the text faithfully, Lord, and through this actually serve the church, Lord, and learn how to preach better, Lord, and through your strength, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.